Hey friends, welcome back to the cabin, and today's video is a tutorial especially for beginners on canning, and we're canning green beans. So I wanted to make a video geared especially towards beginner pressure canners so that you can step out with confidence when you get ready to can your first jar of green beans. And I recommend green beans for your first because it has one of the shortest processing times at pressure of the foods that you'll process. A pint is 20 minutes and a quart is 25 minutes. This is a ball mason jar. These are designed to withstand the pressure and the heat of pressure canning. There's many brands out there. I would suggest that you stay with made in the USA because I have heard of some problems with those made in another country, that they weren't up to the standards that they should be, especially the lids. So we're going to talk about the lids now that we're going to use on these jars. They're a two-part lid, just like this, and you can see that you have a gasket in this lid right here. It's flat, mostly flat. There's a little bit of a concave where it kind of reaches over the rim of the jar, but it has a gasket that is integrated into the lid. These are disposable. These are not reusable as far as canning. Now when you get through canning, you can use these just for storage or for your dry goods or something like that, but you don't want to reuse these for pressure canning. The second part is going to be your ring, your screw top, your screw ring, and it is actually, this seats down in there or it goes on top of your jar first. Let me show you that. And what we're going to demonstrate in a minute, but it's going to go on top of the jar just like this, and then you're going to screw your band down just like that. But now there's some little particular things about that we'll get into when we start putting our green beans into our jars. And there's some tips that you need to know as far as tightening them down and those kinds of things. Now my canner actually has 3 quarts of water in it already. That's what the manufacturer calls for, is 3 quarts. And I've got 9 pint jars. Now you can double stack this canner, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to do the 9 jars so that I don't overwhelm you with information. We're just going to do a single layer of pint jars. Now it will hold 9 in the bottom, and I've got 3 quarts of water warming in here with the jars that they're about half full of water to hold them down so that they can be heating up too, because you want your jars warm. Behind my canner, I have a pot with just my flats, just the flat part of my lids in there in very warm water, maybe simmering, not boiling. They used to recommend boiling, but they don't recommend boiling anymore. They just want them simmered or in very warm water, and that's just to kind of loosen that gasket up so that it can really get a grip on those jars. We went out this morning and we picked green beans out of the garden, and we have had rain for several days, so they were a little bit muddy, a little bit dirty. But we got snap beans, green beans, that they're all called the same thing, and these are actually contenders. This is my first year to grow contenders. I normally grow the Blue Lake, but I like the Blue Lake a lot, but I'm really liking the contenders. They're stringless and they snap. And I've already put some up in the jar. They processed like a breeze, and so I'm really pleased with them. But we're looking at probably 1.5 gallons of snapped green beans, and we're going to see how far that goes. But I feel confident that we're going to get our 9 jars anyway. So let's talk about what else you need besides, of course, your canner and your jars. And we talked about the lid. The lids in the pot that are in warm water, and we also talked about our green beans, but we also need a pot, a teapot or something with warm water in that we're going to pour over the green beans. Now these green beans, you can see they're raw. This is what we call raw pack. There's 2 different types of steps that you can take when you get ready to put these in the jars. You can either do raw, or you can do what's called hot pack, and that's where you will blanch the green beans or whatever vegetable or meat that you're using, and it's going to be warm or hot, and you're going to put it in hot jars with hot water. Now with green beans, I'll always raw pack. I don't go through that extra step to go ahead and blanch them because I feel like it's totally unnecessary and it's just extra work. But there are some things that do fare better if they're hot packed. But today, for the sake of this video, we're going to raw pack the green beans, which is why I don't want my water boiling when I put it in my jars. I just want it good and warm, good and hot, but maybe not to the boiling point. My green beans are not cold. They're at room temperature. They were fresh picked this morning, rinsed and snapped, and they're ready. Now, cold green beans out of the refrigerator, you don't want to put them in super hot jars and super hot water over them. Well, the water isn't as important as putting cold green beans in hot jars. I've never had it happen, but you don't want that thermo shock to cause your jars to crack. That's something else that we need to talk about too. The reason that we want everything within a certain temperature range on the warm side is because we don't want the thermo shock from the extreme differences in temperature that will cause your jars to break. Now, mason jars are tough and they're tempered. They can take a little bit more than say your drinking glass, your tea glasses or something like that, but there is still a range outside of that they can crack as far as extreme temperature. So we don't want to do that. We just want everything kind of on the same plane, same level. Now for the other equipment that you need, you're going to need some type of funnel. I love my stainless funnel, but you certainly can use a plastic funnel. There's anything that works for you. I like to have a couple of little dishes here to set things in that keeps my towel cleaner. You're going to need salt if you choose to use salt. It's not necessary for the preserving, but if you do choose salt, make sure that it's not common table salt. Make sure that it is canning salt, because that doesn't have the anti-caking additives in it that can cloud the liquid in your jars. And one thing about canning is you want it to be pleasing to look at. You want it to look healthy and look clean. So we're going to go with the canned salt, and that's going to help our water to stay nice and clear. Now over here I have vinegar, and what I'm going to use that vinegar for is before I put my lid on, I'm going to make sure that I take a paper towel or a rag and clean rag and dip in that vinegar, and I'm going to clean the top of that jar to make sure there's no speck of salt on there or any kind of residue. And this is going to be your lid magnet. Now I place my lids alternately in the pot before I turn them on to warm, upside down, right side up, upside down, and right side up. That makes it easier. They're not as apt to overlap and stick to one another, and you pull out two at a time sometimes. That's just a little tidbit to help it make it easier to get your lids out. And also you need some type of jar lifter because those jars are very hot. I'm going to take a jar out and show you that it's about half full with water, a little bit less. And I'm not going to pour that water back in the canner because I want my canner to stay at 3 quarts. So I pour it out in my sink and I set it over here in my dish, and we're fixing to fill it with green beans and get started. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put our funnel on. This jar is nice and warm. Now for a pint, we want to do a half a teaspoon of salt, but salt is totally optional. Now with my very clean hands, I'm just going to drop my green beans down in here. Some of them seem a little bit too big. I can go ahead and snap them as I go in. There we go. And I'm going to talk to you about headspace as well. And also we're going to debubble, and I like to use this old spoon because it has a rounded end on it. Let me see if I can show you. It's got a rounded end on it. It's not sharp like a knife, so it's not going to damage the inside of your jars. Okay, so some of these are not wanting to go down in there completely, but I think when we add our warm water, I think we'll be fine. That's going to help them. work their way down. All right, so this is warm water. It's not boiling. And we're going to do 1 inch of headspace, which is right at the bottom of this rim right here on your jar. This is called the shoulder of your jar. And then this, you see this ridge right here, not below it, but at it or a smidgen above it is going to be about 1 inch of headspace. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to debubble, because we want to get trapped air out of there, because we want our headspace to be true. And if there's trapped air in there, then when we go to pressure canning it, it's going to actually allow that headspace maybe to drop more than it should. So, and we're still pretty close. I'm going to add just a tad bit more. I'm not going to overpack these jars just for the sake of time. But I think I could add a little bit more to this one. Let's add a couple more pieces. Yeah. Oh, and you can see that beautiful color already showing up. But we want to make sure, oh, that's exactly where I want it. Okay. So, all right, so the next thing that we do is we want to dip our rag or our towel. And I normally use a rag, but this time I forgot my rag. And so it's on the other side of the room, so I decided to go ahead and just use a paper towel. But a couple of things that you're checking for when you do that. Now, we talked about residue. We're looking for little specks of salt or any kind of greasy residue, which we don't have greasy residue on the green beans. But we're also checking for nicks and cracks. That's very important that you inspect your jar tops, or even your jars, but especially your tops. You don't want nicks or cracks because you won't get a good seal. Now I'm going to reach over here and grab a lid with my magic wand. Okay, and we're going to center that right there. And you can feel when you set that on there that that rubber gasket is soft, and it already tries to grip just a little bit on there. Now, I've got my ring sitting over there. Now, here's something that I want to show you that's very important. 3 fingers, okay? And this is warm, so you're not going to grip it very long. 3 finger tight. You're not going to crank down on this. 3 finger tight. And the reason that you don't want it any tighter than that is you want the air to be able to escape, because a pressure canner is a type of vacuum canner and it's going to force air out. All right, so let's go on to the next one. Now we're ready to put our lid on, and let's talk about a couple of things before we put it on there. With the All-American, we're going to line this arrow up with this indentation right here, but I want you to refer back to your canner model manufacturer's manual for the proper way to put your lid on. The Presto is a little bit different, but they're both perfectly safe if you follow the guidelines. Now, this is your vent right here. You want to make sure that this is open, and what you can do is you can hold it up, and if you see light through it, and this is something you want to do before you start canning, make sure that your lid is ready and it's safe, your vent is open. And if you'll go back and I'm going to refer back to the video that I talked about earlier, where I talk about the differences in water bath and pressure canning. There's lots of safety tips in that video, so you want to be sure to refer to that. Possibly even watch that before you start canning, and that'll help give you some confidence and know the ins and outs and right ways to do things. But I know that my pressure gauge is accurate, and also my vent hole is open. So we're going to put this on here, and we're going to go off to the side of that because we have these locking tabs, and we're going to make sure that those tabs are caught up underneath where these toggles are. I think there's 3 tabs on there, maybe 2. I hadn't really counted them, I just know they're there. All right, and one thing that we want to do, yeah, I see 3. 1, 2, 3. One thing that we want to do is try to have our lid as level as possible, and you can do that with your toggles. If it's low on one side and high on the other, don't tighten this side yet. Go ahead and tighten a little bit on this side, but we're still going to do opposites. Okay, you're going to work opposite sides. Okay, so we want to make sure that we go all the way around and snug them up just like that. Okay, that's good. So now what we're doing is we're allowing the water in the canner to come to a boil, and it's building steam inside the canner. Now we're not building pressure yet because we don't have our weight on, but you can see here that we're getting a pretty good head of steam coming out of there, and when it gets to a good strong steam, steady stream of steam, then you're going to time it for 10 minutes. And what we're doing is we're evacuating as much air as possible out of the canner, because it's a vacuum type preserver, pressure sealer, pressure canner, and we're forcing as much air out of there as possible and filling it with steam. So that's a pretty good amount of steam. So I'm going to go ahead and hit my timer, and when we've been 10 minutes, I'll come back with you and we'll talk about the next steps. Okay. At this point, the canner has been venting for a full 10 minutes, so now we can put our weight on and allow the pressure to build. We're making all kind of racket. We're popping and we're moaning and we're groaning over here. Sounds like the mad scientist, but it's fixing to start rocking. I can hear it. There it goes. See? All right, so now that this is where we start timing. When we get a good steady rock, and we're going to set our timer for 20 minutes. But one thing I want you to do is you don't want this steady, non-stop rocking. So we're going to adjust our flame down. So what we're doing is we're allowing it to rock and then pause and rock and pause. And that's another little safety factor as far as pressure. It's not going to build up too much pressure, but when it rocks non-stop, what is happening is the canner is working really hard to maintain the pressure at 10.5 or 11 pounds, because it's wanting to build more and more if you have your flame on high, or your heat, if it's an electric stove, on high. So we're going to back it down just a little bit, and you see that we're pausing now, but it's fixing to rock again, and it's going to be intermittent. You're going to rock, and then you may pause for 5 seconds. Next time might be 10 seconds, might even be 30 seconds. But as long as it doesn't fall below 10 pounds, you're going to be fine. And you can see there we've been talking, and it stopped and it started. So I'm just going to let it rock on and do its thing. And I'll be back with you in just a bit, and I'll talk to you about what we do after the time is up. Well, it's been 20 minutes. So we're going to turn the flame off out from under the canner, and here's the next steps. You just let it sit quietly, and what you're going to do is you're going to allow this pressure to drop gradually on its own. You don't want to do anything to help it out. So we're going to exercise a little bit of patience, and we're going to allow this temperature, this pressure, to drop completely on its own without any help. So our pressure gauge is showing 0. Once it hits 0, I actually let it sit about 5 or 10 more minutes. You don't want to let it sit much longer than that before you go ahead and pull your lid off. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take off our weight, and it's going to be hot, so you probably want to use a pot holder. Now this is for the All-American. The Presto or another brand, of course, always refer back to your owner's manual when it comes to these steps, but they're going to be pretty much basically the same. Now we're going to take these toggles down just like we put them on. We're going to do opposite sides. What we're not going to do is take the lid completely off. I'm going to loosen it, and I'm going to set it up on its locks, or these little lock tabs right here, and it's picked up just a little bit. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow air to move in and out, and we're going to let it sit here about 5 or 10 more minutes, and that's going to allow the air temperature inside and outside to equalize a little bit. Now by doing all of these steps at the end, you're going to be avoiding something that's very common in pressure canning, is siphoning. And the siphoning is when the liquids are pulled out of your jars before you take them out. So we want to avoid that if at all possible. So I'll be back with you in about 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll take the lid off, and then we'll pull our jars out. It's been about 7 or 8 minutes, so let's go ahead and pull that lid off, and we're going to pull it off away from us because we don't want that steam and that heat to hit us in the face. And we're going to set our lid off carefully. And anytime you're dealing with your pressure canner, you want to protect your pressure gauge, not bump it, do anything to damage it or to upset its calibration. So let's go ahead and pull out a jar, and let's just see what they look like. Oh, this is the flat green beans, and you can see that the vacuum hasn't pulled up, the heat in the vacuum. Now they should settle down as they cool down. This one doesn't, well, it does a little bit. Something that is a good sign and very common is they will still be boiling. There'll still be bubbles bubbling up in there. So let's see if we can see one. No, there's a little bit. I'm not sure you can see it on camera. So, okay, so what you want to do when you take your jars out like that, number one, you don't want them in a draft. You don't want them in front of a fan or an air conditioner. And you also want to be sure to set them on a towel on a counter, because sometimes counters are cool, and the towel will be a more neutral zone temperature-wise, and you'll set your jars on those, and there won't be that thermal shock from a cool counter and a hot jar, because that can cause them to crack. So we're going to go ahead and take the rest of these beautiful jars out and set them here, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about what your next steps are. So I'll be back in just a second. Okay, now we've got our jars out. We're going to allow them to cool from 12 to 24 hours. We're not going to do anything with the bands on there. They may have loosened up. That's perfectly normal. You don't want to tighten them. You don't want to loosen them more, and you don't want to take them off yet. You just leave everything like it is, and you want to watch your jars and make sure that they seal. Now they may seal at different times. Some of them were sealed when they came out of here. Some of them may take a little bit longer as they cool down to seal. Sometimes you'll hear that ping, that real common ping sound. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just hear a little faint pop. This one is not sealed. It's still got a dome in the middle. This one, I think all the rest of them look sealed except for this one. Now I'm going to watch this one and make sure it seals. If it doesn't seal for some reason, I'll just either go ahead and put it in a pot and we'll have it with supper, or I'll stick it in the refrigerator once it's cooled. You don't want to stick it in there now because it is right at boiling hot. So those look beautiful. You see the clear water, the clear liquid, because we didn't use table salt, we used cannon salt, and it really makes a difference. So when we started out with this video, my purpose was to set you up for success. And you can see that we have these 9 beautiful jars of green beans in that beautiful clear, crystal clear liquid. They're sealed. They're ready to go on the pantry shelf. They're going to be a fine vegetable that you can serve your family and you can be proud of it. And that's your first steps to learning to can and venturing off into other vegetables and maybe even eventually putting by some of your own meat. I really enjoy bringing these kinds of videos. I love sharing skills. And in these days that we can learn a skill that will help us to feel a little more secure as far as our food supply and what we have available for our family, that's a good thing. But I want to remind you of something else that's very special. Don't ever forget that your Heavenly Father loves you. And we'll see you on the next video. God bless.